ultimately now my goal is to point people back to him, to bring his love back into the world, because that's something that we so desperately need right now. The world is lacking in love, especially unconditional love.
What if your pain wasn't meant to break you, but become the fuel for your power? Today's guest, Kayla, is of Celestial Spirit Consulting, is a psychic medium, intuitive coach, and energy healer who has mastered the sacred art of alchemy. If you ever felt like your pain was too heavy to carry, this episode will show you how to turn it into light. Get ready for a bliss level conversation as we dive into trauma, truth, and transformation with the wonderful Kayla. Okay.
Hi.
So I really want our listeners to understand that even the people that have come through the other side and they show up in life, they look healed. What was it like before the healing happened? What was life like? Um, honestly, when you didn't even know you needed to be healed, because I feel like so many people are there today.
Right.
They're trudging through life, and things might not be comfortable, and things are falling apart, and people are trying so hard to hold it together. I want them to understand like what it looked like for you when you finally realized that healing was the only way out.
I was kind of forced to fall apart, honestly. I mean, if you're struggling to hold it together, there's a reason that you're supposed to let go, right? My life was messy and chaotic. I have a severe bipolar disorder diagnosis, and it really started surfacing when I was about 16 years old. I was having panic attacks. I didn't know what was happening. By 19, I was self-harming. I wanted therapy, but my parents didn't really believe me. I was always called kind of dramatic. And I was a dramatic kid, but I think it was more so I wanted attention and validation. I wanted to be seen. And it just all kind of compacted until 2013 when I got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. From there, I tried every medication. I mean, if it's out there, you name it, I've tried it. And I really lost myself in 2014. I had my first diagnosed manic episode. And from there, it just became this cycle of every spring I was going to go manic, every winter I was going to be depressed. And however bad the depression was, I was going to shoot that much higher into a manic episode in spring. And a lot of people kind of glorify mania, and it has its benefits. I mean, you get a lot more energy. You're ready to clean your depression hole. You usually are a lot more confident, charismatic, and happy. But there's all these downsides of you're blowing your money because you have no impulse control. You're saying things probably that you don't mean because you have no filter. You can become sexually promiscuous. For me, it took the form of emotional affairs. I always had a boundary where I would not talk to anybody near me because I was married, but it was like my marriage wasn't supporting me in the way that I needed. I was very much alone, very much abandoned in my marriage, and I needed to feel seen and validated. And I regret all of that. I have since healed and I don't partake in that anymore. But I also had to leave the marriage because I recognized that it wasn't serving me. It wasn't aiding in my healing. It was making me worse. And that was kind of what manic me was trying to tell me during those episodes. And I didn't realize it because I was just shaming her and shoving her down. And when I really started listening to her, which was in 2020, I recognized that yeah, I was broken. Yeah, I was making mistakes, but I wasn't doing this stuff for no reason. It wasn't because I was just all willy-nilly and wanting to hurt people. I did everything in my power to control my episodes so that I didn't hurt people. I tried not to be a burden. I had kids and I was still being a mom on top of being a wife, working full-time jobs. Like I was contributing as much as I could while having these mental breakdowns. And in 2020, I just realized that that part of me was screaming for help. She needed things to change and shift, or I wasn't going to make it out of here. So in 2021 is when my spiritual awakening started, and that's when my healing journey really began.
Which, number one, it kind of feels like you said, it does get glamorized sometimes, because it almost feels like the depression side of things is when, like, the illness, and the manic side is when she's rocking, you know. but there's bad parts to both.
Yes.
And you're saying the manic side was like crying out for help.
Yes. The manic side is when the filter goes, the impulse control goes, and you're just like, freedom! And there's no stopping it. Like anytime I would try to stop it, I'd have a panic attack. So it was like there was consequences to trying to hold it back. And it's almost like, you know, that devastating forest fire that comes to clear everything out. Like everybody's upset because everything's destroyed, but it's trying to get a message across. Like there's a regrowth that needs to happen. And that's when I realized that is when I actually started healing from it and it not controlling my life anymore. But yeah, it can be devastating. I mean, a lot of people struggle with extramarital affairs and hypersexuality during that. They can become very chaotic and make last minute decisions that, you know, can be detrimental. I mean, during a manic episode, I joined Mary Kay and purchased like $1,800 of inventory thinking I was going to have this business, and it just did not work. You know, I adopted a dog during a manic episode and I had no idea what I was doing with the dog. I'd never had a dog in my life. And so there was this point that I reached where I agreed that if I had a big decision I wanted to make, I would sit on it for 3 to 4 months to make sure that it wasn't a manic decision, because I didn't want to make a mistake and blow my money. So it took a lot of responsibility and accountability to get myself through those episodes. And sometimes it was all I could do just to get through a day, because I would just want to be free so badly. And I felt like everything was a prison in that moment. It was miserable for me emotionally.
What was the rock bottom? What was the catalyst where you finally was like, I have to heal? Or were you just pushed into a healing?
Both. 2020 COVID was my rock bottom. The isolation launched me into a year-long episode, manic episode. And I would think I was coming out of it. I would think I was normal. And then I would launch back into another phase of it. And I tried to leave my marriage that year. Things were not aligned for me to be able to do so. So I had to go back to the marriage that I knew was kind of killing me. And 2021, I was so miserable. I gained 50 pounds in a year. I had lost 50 pounds in 2020 and then gained 50 back in 2021. Mid 21, May of 2021 is when I woke up. Like I decided in sometime around April that I was not going to be able to stay in the marriage. I wanted out. I didn't know how I was going to get out, but I was setting my sights on it. And in May is when the spiritual blindfold was like ripped off my eyes. And I thought I was having.
Was there a prayer, like, God, like, just please help me? Or what, like you said, because you just woke up one day.
Yeah, it was the most abrupt thing. I didn't start it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know spiritual awakenings were a thing. It was just like God decided enough was enough and we're going to start your healing now. And it felt like he'd ripped something like duct tape, honestly, because it hurt. It came off with a whip, you know? And it was like every nerve in my body was on fire. Everything was brighter. Everything was louder. I was getting so much extrasensory input. I didn't know I was psychic yet. Now I know that these were my gifts waking up. But at the time, I was like, I'm crazy. Like, what is happening to my body? I thought I was having a manic episode that was very different, but it felt similar with the emotional, like, overwhelm and then the sensory overload. And I just thought, okay, I got to ride another one out, I guess. And so I got my Nintendo Switch, I downloaded Stardew Valley, and I dissociated into my video games whenever I could, when I wasn't being a mom. And after about 3 weeks, I realized this is not changing. Like, this isn't letting up. And then I started getting all these downloads. It was like, the first thing that happened was I started really questioning my belief system. I had been a devout Christian for 31 years and literally woke up and I was like, why would God hate gay people? Why would God, kill his son? Like, there was just so many questions. I have answers to things now. I don't believe that God hates gay people, and I had to work through that. I had to understand all the facets of that. I had to understand salvation and Jesus and really get it from a non-religious perspective. But those are my questions, and it made
podcast. Like,
yeah, I know.
We can go all into that on.
We could, but I had to take the opportunity to step back. And the thing with Christianity is you are afraid of going to hell. So you're afraid to question anything. You're afraid to question religion. You're afraid to question pastors. and how it's preached, and you're afraid to question the Bible. And God came through very clear. I've always had a connection to him since I was a child, and I could feel him. He was like the only thing that I knew in the moment. Like, I was like, nothing makes sense right now but you, God. And I told him, I was like, you're going to have to pull me through this because I don't know what this is. And I literally heard him told me, just explore. Don't be afraid. Let it unfold. And I was like, okay, don't let me get too far. And that was always my prayer. Anytime something would come up, I would be like, I don't mind looking into this, but don't let me get too far if this is not right, you know? So he would just drop what I call downloads. Like, I would be battling with something, this concept, and he would just bloop, drop it in my head, and it would make sense out of nowhere. And I was like, how, you know? One of the big
Did
ones
you
was,
ask for an answer, or do you think it just showed up in the moment you needed it?
it's both. There was one that God told me, he nudged me to look into reincarnation. I was like, what? You know, being a Christian for this long, I didn't understand how reincarnation and salvation could coexist. And I told him, I was like, I'm not going to research this. You're going to have to show me your truth because I feel like there's too much conflicting information. I want to know what you think. And he started dropping, and I have this series on my TikTok. It's this like 5-video series about heaven, hell, salvation, reincarnation, and like one other component of it. And he showed me how they all coexist and how it all works together. And I was just like mind blown. That was the first real big download that I had. And then I started recognizing that I was psychic. I was realizing that I wasn't just manic. I wasn't having these manic episodes. I was literally feeling into other dimensions and realms. I was feeling other beings. And when the awakening happened, it was like I was a beacon that just lit up, and all of these souls were coming to me. Entities were coming to me. Angels were showing up. And it was like, I was freaking out because I was like, why is my door moving by itself? Why am I hearing voices when I walk through the hallway at night? You know, like, it was crazy. So God was like teaching me how to protect myself. There was one point where he like removed everything, all of the friends in my life, all of the spirits, all of the guides. He just put everything on a back burner. And I was like, God, why is it so quiet? And I got this vision of my property. There were 4 light beings standing at the 4 corners of my property. And there was this veil that was just holding back like millions of souls just all around my property. Some were light, some were dark, some were human, some were animal. I mean, it was crazy. And God said, you're not ready to protect yourself yet. Until you are, I'm protecting you. And it was like,
I just got chills.
I know, it was so amazing. And then he would send reinforcements. So I was seeing hawks all that time. Literally, I walked out to put my daughter in a car, and a hawk just went down in my front yard and just stared at me. I was seeing the number 444, which in angel numbers is protection. And then I also got a feather on my front step, like just literally in front of my door. There was a white feather, and I was like, wow, okay, y'all are here. I get it now, you know? So God would just deliver exactly what I needed when I needed it, and not a moment sooner. And he wouldn't tell me too much because he knew I'd get overwhelmed. I used to, when he would show me this stuff, get so overwhelmed that I would kind of start to dissociate. And they call it cognitive dissonance. It's where your human brain is struggling to conceive what's happening in the spiritual realm. So I would get overloaded, and I would just take like a week off from my spiritual stuff until I could handle looking into it again and thinking about it. And then that's when the healing journey began. So probably 5 or 6 months into my awakening, I started just getting all of this intuitive guidance about what I needed to heal. First, it was emotional regulation. I really struggled to regulate my emotions in general. I felt like I was constantly just like crying or angry. Like I would have like these kind of fits of rage when I got overwhelmed. I would just like, freak out.
Too sensitive.
Yes. Yes, too sensitive. And God was showing me you need to learn how to master your emotions. Like it wasn't just regulation, it was emotional mastery. And that one took me 3 years to really get to a point where I could master it. And then he brought in nervous system regulation. He showed me that I had been in survival mode pretty much my whole life. And that when your body's in survival mode, you don't know who you are. You're just like a shadow of yourself. You're operating on the bare minimum fumes. And until you get out of fight or flight, freeze, fawn, you can't start healing. So I really had to start taking time away from being a mother and prioritizing my needs. So, you know, when my husband at the time would get home, I would check out. I would go do what I needed to do to really ground myself, to get myself into a place where I could handle life again. Once I started doing that, the inner child healing came in. So it was really recognizing the abandonment wound that I was dealing with and digging up all the gunk that goes with that, why I felt so emotionally neglected, validating that even when other people had their way worse childhoods, it still affected me and I internalized it in a way that hurt me. And that's the important part about inner child healing. It's not about what was done to you. It's about the way that you took it in. So navigating that. And then after that is the inner teenager and navigating her rage and how rebellious and angsty she is over what happened, you know? From there, it was shadow work. And that one is probably one of the most challenging ones because you literally have to look at yourself and say, you're not perfect. You're broken. You're flawed. Some people have an easy time accepting that they're flawed, but then they keep repeating the cycles. It's not just about accepting it. It's about changing the behavior in a way that serves you.
Some people, that's just how they see themselves as flawed. Like they can't see that there's anything beautiful and wonderful about them. Like, so they're just like, that's fine, I'm flawed, you know?
And at one point, I had this vision of this big, dark monster, the shadow monster. And it was literally wrapping its arms around little me. And I realized that the shadow is what was created to protect the wounded inner child. So when you look at your shadow, your brokenness as something that's protecting that wounded part of you, you can appreciate it. You can say, thank you.
My God. That is so profound.
Yeah.
Your shadow is protecting the wounded inner child.
It's what we did to survive. And then it took on a life of its own. It became our identity because we didn't know any better. So when I learned that, actually there was a spirit guide that came in and showed me that. He was like this blue-black amorphous blob. And he was kind of creepy. He kind of looked like an entity at first, but he was cute too. And like the more that I got to know him, the more I realized like that's what my shadows look like. Like they look scary, but when you get to like realizing what they are, they're cute. They're sweet. They're there to protect you. And so then I was able to like really look at my brokenness and be like, the rage in me is because I'm so tired of not being heard and seen and unappreciated. The one that seeks validation and doesn't want to be alone is the girl that was emotionally neglected. And I was able to start loving those parts of myself and then integrating them because of it. And it didn't have power over me anymore. Once I realized why I was the way I was able to start breaking free from it because I could give that to myself. And that's why I think the shadow and the inner child go hand in hand, because the inner child needs to be reparented to break the cycles that the shadow's been protecting them through, you know? Mm-hmm. So the shadow work was probably one of the hardest because I always try to do right by people, but then I would mess up. I'm only human, you know? Mm-hmm. And I started getting visions when I was working on integrating my shadow of kintsugi, which is Japanese pottery. And
I never remember what it's called. So I'm surprised. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, the art of Japanese pottery is that when it breaks, they don't throw away the pieces. They glue them together with gold filigree. So it makes a more beautiful piece. And it's like the brokenness leads to the beauty. Now that's what makes it special. And so when I started looking at myself through that lens and realizing that like that part of me was protecting the little child in me, and that those parts of me weren't bad. They were just cries for help or pointing to things that just really needed attention and healing, I was able to let it go, you know, and really rise above it. And then the final piece before the next level of healing was the balancing of my masculine and feminine energies. Everybody has both. And I watched my mom growing up. She was kind of the leader in the household. My dad had severe OCD and he was pretty much incapacitated from the time I was like 13 on. And so my mom was in charge of everything and she was stressed and she made things happen, you know, because she was the only one there. And so I learned that that's kind of how you live life, is you push, you force, you drive until you burn out, and then you get up and you keep going again because people need you. And I learned to people please. Yes, I learned to people please. I learned to put my needs last. I learned to seek approval through performance. And that is masculine. That's wounded masculine energy. And women are not supposed to be in masculine energy. If we're in masculine energy for too long, we burn out. And that's where survival mode even comes in, and the nervous system dysregulation. So I had to start learning what being feminine was. It's not just being girly and dressing up. It's being willing to receive, being willing to ask for help, recognizing that you do need help. Essentially, the feminine in you multiplies whatever the masculine is bringing in. So if your environment and you are bringing in anxiety and depression and fear, your feminine part of you is multiplying that. But if you can find peace and allow yourself to rest and reset, and the masculine's not running the show, then you bring in a lot better opportunities for yourself, and you bring in partners that want to honor that.
So then the flower metaphor makes sense because, the flower receives its nutrients from the rain and the sun and the soil, its environment, right?
Yes,
And then it
100%.
multiplies. If it's a good environment, it's going to multiply. I kind of always, I had this thought one time that the feminine and masculine energy was almost like, if you looked at it like this, like the masculine like creates this almost like a snow globe around the feminine. I can't say that word. And then the feminine like exists within this, like what you're saying, an environment that's created of protection, basically, and love, and where it can express itself.
Right.
Like, I
Yes,
think,
100%.
yeah.
100%. And the masculine has to be healed too. So whether it's your masculine protecting yourself, or external, if an actual masculine protecting you, you guys are kind of feeding off each other. So if you're in wounded masculine, you're going to attract a man in his wounded feminine. So he's going to look to you like a mommy, right? If you are in your feminine power, that's when you attract in the protectors, the masculine men who want to take care of you and provide. Until I was able to get into that energy, I really wasn't able to even attract what I was seeking in a partner. And I definitely wasn't able to protect myself energetically either. So I had to get to those 5 levels. And then it was like, partially through the process, I realized that the reason I was so bipolar was because I was absorbing everybody's energies. I'm an emotional empath. So I take on people's stuff without even realizing I'm doing it. It's my way of trying to help. And that's when I started learning alchemy. I'm an elemental alchemist. So I learned that not only did I take in all this energy, I was holding on to it. And when you hold on to all of that negative energy in your body, it becomes mental and physical illnesses. And so by the time I was 19, I had been isolated, dealing with my parents' stuff, not having an outlet, not in therapy, not knowing how to get rid of it. And so it was really breaking up in my body, which is what became the bipolar disorder. So I
And
started
did
learning
you have
how.
other illnesses besides the bipolar that, manifested within you from?
Yes. So I was known as the girl who got all the weird things. If there was a medication I was taking, I would have the most severe reaction to it. I had this weird disorder called erythema nodosum, which is where all these horrible, painful knots would just pop up all over my body. It
Oh
was
my
so strange.
gosh.
I had fibromyalgia. My joints would just ache all of the time. I had bipolar disorder. When I was younger, I had PMDD. So I was put on birth control from the time I was 16, trying to regulate my hormones. Like, it was all of these things just started happening to my body. And it was like, okay, when's Kayla going to get something else weird, So yes, very much so. And then God started showing me, like, you got to purge this stuff. You got to get it out of your body. It's not meant to be held on to. And that's when the alchemy came in. So I learned to work with the elements. God puts these things here on earth for us. And it started when I was learning about the chakra system, doing energy healing. I was learning to breathe into each chakra and kind of expel all of the gunk that was inside of those chakras. So using air, breath work to do so. Then I learned how to take Epsom salt baths, and I could kind of release it from my body, and I would just picture it going down the drain with the water, So I would cry, I would have salt in there, which salt naturally cleanses your auric field anyway. So that was always pulling it out of my body and down the drain. And I started to see the effects of this when some of these symptoms started lifting. I was having an easier time not flying off the handle when I would get upset. I wasn't overcome and wanting to kill myself every time I got sad or something hurt me. It was like I could finally breathe a little bit. So I kept just purging them, and then obviously earth, you go out and ground in nature. You put your bare feet on the soil. You touch a tree. Nowadays I touch a tree, I'm like, take it from me, please. And It's a beautiful way to work through it. And then there's the ether. That's the fifth element, and that is spirit, essentially. So you're working through spirit, God, source, to transform those things. It's not really me doing it, but I'm activating it through my physical body. So that's what alchemy is. It's shifting it into something better. And I've seen it happen so many times. As I clear that energy, good things start coming in for me. Whether it's finding love or finding peace or just a sudden spurt of clients come in, whatever it is, I'm always taken care of because I'm doing my energetic hygiene. I'm getting rid of all the stuff that was blocking me in the first place.
That's amazing. I love it. And I love how you actually use all the elements. I mean, that makes so much sense.
Like that God put plants and rocks and stuff here just to be pretty. But
Yeah.
the thing I've learned is God doesn't create anything without a purpose. And crystals themselves, they hold high frequency vibrations in their natural state. And if you put selenite in your room, it's going to suck up a lot of that energetic stuff. It's almost like, sometimes I feel like I'm selenite because that's what I do. I just suck things off of people when I'm working for them, like working with them and working with their bodies. And then you have to cleanse selenite the same way you have to cleanse yourself. You got to put it out in the sun, put it out in the moon, bury it in the ground, whatever it is. It's the exact same thing. The sun is fire, you know, and the ground is earthing. So you have to treat yourself like a crystal, essentially, to get yourself cleansed and back to balance.
Yeah, and like when we go to the beach, that is, you're using alchemy at the beach. Like you have your feet in the sand, you're grounding, you're, in the water,
It's taking it away with the waves.
Yes, yeah, in sync with the waves and stuff.
You're under the sun, which is its own form of fire. It's kind of like purging and upgrading your DNA as you stand under it.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
I didn't even think about that one. But when I meditate, I always go through like a little cleansing period in my meditation where using my breath, I just really imagine with every breath out, like I'm releasing this ash off of me. I just imagine ash floating away from me. So it's not fire, but it's funny that I associate ash though. Like I
It's like
imagine the ash
dust.
like
You're dusting yourself.
leaving me.
Yeah, I love that.
And you're starting up a community for support. It'll be kind of a coaching program plus support.
Yeah,
My husband's trying to call me.
Do you take a minute?
I might have to take a minute, but so the mediumship. So what drew you to that? Was it just the connection that you had to the other side in your own life? So then when did you realize you could do it for other people?
So the mediumship specifically, I started a spiritual coaching program to get my certification. I wanted to have the tool set for when I was working with people. And the peer coach that I had in the program, we were working one night and she was talking about, we were working through her trauma around her father. And she was saying that she never heard that he was proud of her. She rarely heard that he loved her. And all of a sudden, behind my ear, I heard that was my biggest regret. And I was like, yeah. And like, I knew when my awakening began, I started differentiating between spirits. I could feel not just angels and demons. I could feel human souls. I could feel animal spirits. I could see them to some degree. So I knew they were out there, but this was the first time I'd ever had one talk to me. And I told her, I was like, I think I just heard your dad. And I shared the message and she burst into tears, and I was getting stuff. He was Hispanic or Uruguayan. He was speaking Spanish, but it was coming through as English. So I could hear Spanish, but I was getting the English interpretation, and that was wild. But he said the word mija, and I mentioned it to her, and that ended up being the nickname that he called her. It's a Spanish word for like my dear. And
so does this come through to you? Like, did you hear a voice, or was it kind of a knowing?
It's kind of a knowing. A lot of times it's my voice in my head, but it's not my energy. So because I pick up energy so strongly, I can tell when something's me and when it's not. Part of my training and my psychic stuff, I took like a little gift focus session with a lady, and she helped me work through discerning what was spirit, what was my logical mind, and what was my ego. So I had learned how to put all that aside and know what the difference was. And when it was coming through, I was like, that was not me. And the way spirit usually comes through is it flies in and out of your head. So I was just listening to her. And then all of a sudden this thought of That's my biggest regret came through. And, it's not me saying that. Like, it's not my biggest regret. I didn't do that to her. That kind of actually spurred on more. So there were several women in the coaching program that I was in who'd lost their dads. And I suddenly became like the daddy whisperer. It was so strange. Like, all of their fathers were coming through to me, and I would feel them like on the edge of my consciousness, almost like knocking, like, hey, can I come in with a message? And so I would sit down and I would let it come through. They would show me visions. One girl, I got like a picture of her and her dad when she was a child. I described it to her. There was a song coming through that I think it was My Girl, and it ended up being the song that he and her danced to at her wedding. So there were things that were validating that these were, in fact, their loved ones. It wasn't just me making this up, and there was no way for me to know any of it. I didn't even really
Yeah,
talk to
so
these
they call
girls.
that evidential, right?
Yes.
Mediumship. Okay.
Yes. So that's how I always start my sessions, is I start getting information to prove who they are. How did they pass? What did they talk like? What did they kind of look like? How did they feel? I get a big feeling of their energy. And then I tell the person, like, were they like this? Did they talk this way? Was this something that they would say? And I just kind of let that come through for a bit. And then we start getting messages. They start addressing things that maybe they didn't get to talk about before they passed. And I found that I now have a knack for people who have passed from taking their own lives or overdose. So I get a lot of those people who come through because they didn't get a chance to say what happened. So there's a lot of making peace with their loved ones, a lot of bringing peace to their loved ones as well, like just letting them know that they're okay and that they still love them and all of this. The mediumship isn't something that I lean into all the time. My boundary with it is it needs to be for healing. I don't want to just do it as a parlor trick. I don't want to do it as like a seance to spook people. That's not what my goal is. I want to do it if it helps you. So I usually don't even offer it very often. I do have a session for people specifically if they need it, but it's just something that I've noticed it can help bring closure and give people who are grieving a chance to kind of breathe and move forward. And that's been a huge blessing for me.
Yeah, I love that. Talking about you do a lot of, suicides and drug overdoses and stuff that's really heavy. That's
It is
really
really heavy.
heavy. But so yeah, that was another one of my questions was you have all of these different things like the healing, the coaching, the mediumship. Like do you have a core message or like out of everything, my heart is just set on this. Like I love this.
I love helping people wake up to their fullest potential. With everything that I do, that's what I'm pushing you towards is your most abundant, fulfilled life. Life is too short for us to not heal and step into our purpose. And if you feel unfulfilled in your life, it's because you're not flowing with your purpose. When you're flowing with your purpose, even though you might be tired and it's hard and there's a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of tests, it is fulfilling. Every moment of it is fulfilling. I love what I do. Even if I get tired, even if I get overwhelmed, at the end of the day, I'm just so grateful that I get to do this and move through spiritual realm this way and bring the spiritual realm into the physical realm and share the knowledge that God is dropping into my brain about how time works and how the spiritual realm really is. And ultimately now my goal is to point people back to him, to bring his love back into the world, because that's something that we so desperately need right now. The world is lacking in love, especially unconditional love. And so when I have a session with a client, I'm always trying to bring them to their highest self, remind them of who they are, but I'm also just there to hold them in my energy. I kind of use my energy as a container, and I say, when you're here with me, you can say anything you're feeling. We're not going to judge. We're not going to shame. We're just going to find a way to work through it for you, and we're going to get you to where you need to be. And I think that's probably why my clients keep coming back to me, because they know that at the end of the day, I got their backs, and I'm going to make sure that we're doing this for their greatest and highest good. I'm never going to scare them. I'm never going to judge them. I'm just going to love them where they're at and show them what's possible, where they can get to and how to get there.
So now you mentioned you want to help people find their highest self and live their purpose. You said something about their purpose. Now,
Mhm.
did you write somewhere that it's important that you find is there a method to that? Find yourself first, then your purpose or something? It seems
Yes.
like I read something like that.
Yes. So until you've done a lot of healing, your wounding rules your view of life. So you're really not going to understand what your hobbies are. You're not going to understand what you're drawn to. Most of it is out of survival. So you might be called to speak on stages, but you have a fear of being seen. You're not going to step into that purpose yet, right? So with my program, the way that I'm developing it, we have to do the healing part first. So it's like 3 months of intensive healing to get you to a baseline where you can start receiving your purpose and taking the steps towards it. Because otherwise, if you're full of this wounding, you're going to be scared. You're not going to be ready. You're not going to feel prepared. You're going to be burnt out, and you're not going to be able to take it on. So I prioritize the healing first and foremost before finding your purpose. All you need to know about your purpose is whether or not you feel fulfilled. If you don't feel fulfilled, you're not in your purpose. So then you need to look at what's holding me back. And it's usually something that needs healing first.
I love that. As we wrap up today, Kayla, what do you think is most important for society today to know what it like healing and transformation?
You're never too broken. You can always get back up. You can always heal. You can always improve. And usually, when you reach the point of feeling so beaten down, that is the point of transformation. That's when it's time to rebirth. So, when you get to that place, don't give up. Don't lose hope. Start seeing where you rebuild. Lean into spirit, lean into God, because He's going to show you what the steps are.
Yeah.
And reach out for help. You don't have to walk through this stuff alone. There's people out there like myself that we find it an honor to walk beside people in kind of their death and rebirth cycles. There's nothing that brings me more joy than to see someone spread their wings after literally becoming a pile of ash is how it feels.
Yeah.
Um, People think that failure is the end of it, but you can fail and still be worthy. Failure is just showing you, okay, well, that way didn't work. Now it's time to try a different way. And a lot of people give up when they fail. They feel bad. They think that they're never going to be able to succeed. But really, the success is found in the failures. It's the ones where you get back up and you keep going. You find a different way. So don't give up. Just keep going. Get back up. Figure out a different way to do it. Figure out what you needed to learn from that fall, that death, that shedding of yourself, so to speak. And don't be afraid to really explore the new version of you, to make a new version of you. I've probably died to myself about 8 times over the last 4 years. I don't even recognize the girl that I was in 2021 when this started. So don't be afraid of change.
And isn't that beautiful? Like, who I am today is not who I'm going to be in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I
mean,
hope
your
I'm
body
new somehow, some way, you know?
And your body, you have entirely new skin cells. You become an entirely physically new person every 7 years of your life. And if you think that who you are on the inside is supposed to stay the same from birth till death, no, you're supposed to die. You're supposed to evolve. It's like shedding a skin like a snake. Let
Yeah.
that go. Bring in the new scales, shine, glimmer, like become a better version of yourself. And when you realize that probably the reason you're so miserable is because you're holding on to the old you're not willing to let go of it. All you got to do is just surrender and let go. The rest will happen. It's like a cycle that just kind of sweeps through, and if you flow with it, you're going to come out of it unscathed and stronger.
Well,
But if
just
you try to
like
cling
just
to it,
like the people in our lives, they when they're not energetically aligned with who you are, they fall away. And
hmm
that has to happen also internally with ourselves.
exactly. You have to let go of the pieces of you that are no longer aligned. That's 100%. Because if you try to cling to that, that's when you start getting sick and miserable and dealing with mental illness and physical illnesses, because your body is literally, I mean, it's trying to reject those parts of you and let them go. And you're like, no, I want to hold on to it. You have to let it go.
And your body's so intuitive. This is a whole nother hour to talk about intuition, but
Yes.
your body is like my hair is so intuitive that if you're feeling uneasy, it's a sign. That's your intuition. That's God speaking to you. Like if you're holding on to anxiety, it's going to show up in your body. If you're
hmm
holding on to worry, it's going to show up in your body. If you're holding on to pain, it's going to show up in your body. Like your
Yeah.
body is just like a little intuition beacon.
It is. I mean, that was something I learned. That's part of how I realized I was taking on so much people's energy, because when I started doing this professionally, I would get sick every 2 weeks. And I was like, what is going on? It was just like a rotating cycle. And then I realized I wasn't purging, I wasn't letting all that out. So it was literally attracting physical illness. And I would wake up, my joints were stiff and achy, and I would feel nauseous, and I would get a cold every other week. And it sucked. And now I've really been intentional about cleansing, and I'm
Yeah,
fine, you know?
that's
So.
beautiful. Well, Kayla, I so appreciate you. And this has been a beautiful hour and a half. But any last words that you want to say to everyone, and where can they reach you?
Yeah, so I am Kayla of Celestial Spiritual Consulting. You can find me on my website, celestialspiritualconsulting.com. I have all my offerings on there. On social media, TikTok is my top platform. I'm there, Celestial SLC, short for Spiritual Life Coaching. I'm
TikTok's the
also on
jam.
Instagram. Yes, that's my jam. I love TikToks where I share all my nuggets of truth. I'm also on Instagram, Celestial SLC. And then you can find me on Facebook. I have a business page for Celestial Spiritual Consulting. And I'm also on there as myself, Kayla Allen, dropping a lot of very wordy posts, but that you'll learn a lot from. So I'm on all of those platforms.
Okay, okay, that's wonderful. I'll have everything linked below in the podcast. And until next time, let me
Thank you
just
so much.